Well, folks, I regret to inform you, but the Lithuanians are at it again. They are still trying to carry on with this self-destructive blockade of Kaliningrad. And some people don't like calling it a blockade, much in the same way that some people don't like calling the war in Ukraine, a war. They like to call it a special military operation. In both cases, this is very, very silly. A blockade is a blockade, and a war is a war. And frankly, blockade is a form of warfare. It is an act of war to blockade another country, or in this case, blockade another country's enclave or exclave. I always forget the difference there. I think it's technically an exclave. But as I discussed in at least one video on this before, a little artifact of the Second World War was that Germany lost East Prussia, and some of that was given to the new Polish Republic that was created after World War II, which the Russians just sort of pushed further west into Germany. And the rest of it, the rump East Prussia, along with the old Prussian capital, which had been leveled by Allied bombing in the war. Truly tragic. I mean, I would have... One of these things, if I had a time machine, I'd go back to... I can never pronounce the name. Kongsberg or Kongsberg. I don't know. It's... The letters don't make sense to me. But it's... the old German city that was where Kaliningrad is now. I would have loved to have seen that maybe like in 1912. Really at the height of Germany. But sadly, that was all destroyed. The Germans were, if you ask the Russians, they just disappeared. We don't know where they went. They were all gone. They just, one day they all decided, you know what, now we're going to leave. In reality, they were probably ethnically cleansed. That tends to be what we call it when people are, when certain ethnic groups are displaced by a war and not permitted to go back to their homes afterwards. And so the Ruskies moved Russians into this rump East Prussian territory, and it became an oblast of Russia. And so to this day, the Russians have a single oblast, a little strip of territory, wedged in between the Baltic republics and Poland. And this territory is completely separated by Russia from land. It is only connected by water, and if it was not connected by water, in the form of, what's that? Baltic Sea. I can't believe I drew a blank on that for a second. I turned into Liz Truss. I almost confused the Baltic Sea with the Black Sea. But anyway, the Lithuanians, in the name of enforcing supposed EU sanctions, which in no way would trump treaty obligations that they have with the Russians, they are blockading certain goods moving from mainland Russia through Lithuania, or actually from Belarus, which might as well be Russia, from Belarus through Lithuania into Kaliningrad. And the Ruskies said, don't do this, this is a bad idea. And even if you try and do it, we're just going to send those goods by ship, which is fine, because St. Petersburg is also on the Baltic Sea, and they can just send ships to supply Kaliningrad. It doesn't have a very big population, for what I understand. And even the EU and a lot of the member states were kind of, nudging Lithuanians, saying, hey, you should probably stick to your treaty obligations. We're not going to, we're happy to look the other way, if you want to, allegedly break these sanctions by upholding your treaty obligations, which obviously in international law, to the extent that it exists at all, a treaty is, between two countries, cannot be broken so lightly. Especially considering that I believe those treaties with Russia were a part of the conditions for Lithuania's independence from the Soviet Union. Because Lithuania is not like, let's say, the United States, which declared its independence from the British Empire, or Rhodesia, which also did the same. Lithuania was a Soviet republic that was granted independence by the Soviet government. And so it left conditionally. And the Ruskies, remember this, Russian politicians are talking about this openly, saying, hey, the Lithuanians can't just go back on their deal now that they're independent. And some of the more radical Russian politicians are saying, well, if the Lithuanians want to go back on these deals, then they're going to lose their independence. We'll just strip them of their independence, which, obviously would be largely symbolic. But the fact that that's the way that the Russians are looking at it in their mind should worry people in Lithuania and anyone else who is in NATO, since, oh, by the way, Lithuania is a NATO country, so if they go and start a war with Russia, that's World War III. Because, of course, if the Russians attack Lithuania to try and restore access to Kaliningrad, to try and break the Lithuanian blockade in order to secure a corridor between Kaliningrad and Belarus, that would be considered an act of aggression by NATO. Because the Russians are always in the wrong. The Russians are never justified in the use of force, anywhere, no matter the circumstances. And NATO countries, they always are justified in the use of force. They're always acting in self-defense. That's one of the, the ironclad laws of neoliberalism. Liberals are always right, and anyone who is, not a part of the neoliberal world order is always wrong. So, if we were led by people who cared about stability and world peace and just frankly not being vaporized, Lithuania should be punished by other Western countries. They should be smacked down, either in private or in public, probably in private. They should be given a dressing down. Frankly, if, let's just say, I were the President of the United States, I would have summoned the ambassador to Lithuania to my office, and I would have given him a lecture about sucking the entire world into another world war. And I would probably threaten to kick him out of NATO, in which case the Lithuanians would probably back down. But they haven't, which to me says that Western leaders, and by that I mean, the leaders of important, well-established countries like France, Germany, the United States, Great Britain, they are not being stern enough with Lithuania. Lithuania is getting uppity, and this is not going to end well for anyone. They're increasing the restrictions on Russian transportation through Lithuanian territory. This is a very, very dumb move, because the Ruskies, if they get pushed enough, they are going to act. The Ruskies are more than capable of biting off a little strip, a corridor, around their railroad tracks, running through Lithuania, in order to secure their rights under the treaties that were ratified back in the 90s. I think there was a similar situation with Berlin, if I remember correctly, during Soviet times. I think there was like one train that ran from West Berlin to West Germany through East Germany. Of course, in that case, it was, an Eastern Bloc country that ceded a corridor to a Western country. Now, I might have that wrong, but I believe I've got that correct. And this was, I believe, the settlement that was reached after the Berlin crisis, the Berlin airlift and all that, where the Ruskies tried to do what Lithuania is doing now by cutting off West Berlin and forcing it to integrate itself into East Germany. The Allies chose instead to supply West Berlin and refuse to give in and to give those people up to the Soviets. And so eventually the Soviets relented. Now it's the West, being the bad guy in this scenario, trying to starve out the people of Kaliningrad, I guess, to force them out or something like that. It's not entirely clear why they're targeting Kaliningrad, other than the fact that it's just the most vulnerable piece of Russia that they could get their hands on. But just like with West Berlin, I think that the Lithuanians will find that the Ruskies are not going to give in on Kaliningrad. And if necessary, they will use force to maintain their sovereignty. Now, at that stage, does that 100% means we're going to be in World War III? No, I hope not. The optimist in me says no, but on paper we would be. Because I know that the Western media and Western leaders are not going to say, this is Lithuania's fault if they get attacked, even though it 100% is Lithuania's fault. I keep seeing from pro-Western, pundits and things that, oh, Lithuania is going to get thrown under the bus. They might to a certain extent, but I think if it comes right down to it, and, there is hot war between Russia and Lithuania, the West is not going to throw Lithuania under the bus. It would look too bad for them, because they would be giving the Ruskies, a moral victory. They would be saying, actually, the Ruskies are right this time. And if there's ever a possibility that the Ruskies could be right, if there's ever a history that, hey, this one time with Lithuania, the Ruskies got it right, they were on the right side, they had the better argument, well, then people will have to consider that in the future, rather than just assuming outright everything that Russia says they are wrong about. They're always on the wrong side. They're always the bad guys. Politics is much easier if the Ruskies are always the bad guys. So they can't give them a win to where the Ruskies can say, hey, we were the good guys in this scenario. We were the ones being attacked. We were defending ourselves against an attack on our sovereignty. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.